Mabuhay, or in Kapampangan, luwid kayo. Today's question comes from the summer capital of the Philippines. Ivan from Baguio City asks, can you talk about Proclamation 1081 and the declaration of martial law in the Philippines? Proclamation 1081 was issued on September 21st, 1972 by then Philippine President Ferdinand Enrile Marcos, and it placed the entire country of the Philippines under martial law. It meant that absolute military rule was imposed over the civilian government of the country, and since the president is also the commander-in-chief of the military of the armed forces, Ferdinand Marcos basically took over the entire government and ruled without question. All political power in the country, including control of the national treasury, would be monopolized by the office of the president, or in this case, by one family, the Marcoses. And anyone who opposed them would be in great trouble. And by trouble, I mean it's a matter of life and death. So why did Marcos declare martial law? Was it all that bad? Or was it because he was just thirsty for absolute power and wealth? When Marcos declared martial law, the reason behind it was that the country was on the verge of plunging into chaos, that the communist revolution and other violent elements were plotting to tear the Philippines apart, that for the good of the people and to save the nation from falling apart, the country, the Philippines, must be placed under martial law. And Marcos cited many incidents to support his claim, one of which is the attempted assassination of then Defense Minister Juan Ponce Enrile. Enrile's car was ambushed and riddled with bullets the night before the proclamation was signed. It rained gunfire, and miraculously, Enrile survived. But the thing is, in reality, this was just for show. The attempted assassination of Enrile was nothing but a propaganda. It was a fake attack to justify martial law. And Enrile himself would actually admit to this back in 1986, that it was his own men who peppered his car, his empty car, with bullets. And as it turns out, Proclamation 1081 was not even signed on September 21st. It was actually signed on September 17th. It was just post-dated to September 21st because Marcos was notoriously superstitious when it comes to numbers, especially when it comes to number 7. And the proclamation was not even announced on September 21st. It was announced days later on the evening of September 23rd. And by then, the military under Marcos's command had rounded up and imprisoned many who opposed Marcos. Hundreds, if not thousands, were arrested, detained, and tortured. Not only politicians, but also students, activists, labor leaders, journalists, and many others. Literally, anyone who did not agree with Marcos was in grave danger of being abducted, tortured, or worse, killed or murdered in cold blood. Even if it was just one comment disagreeing with Marcos, it was enough to throw you in jail and be subject to abuse, or worse, a violent death. And despite all his claims that the country was in a state of emergency in 1972, the plans to impose martial law was already in place as early as 1969. Even Marcos's own diary would reveal this. Now ideally, martial law should only be imposed in times of great danger, when the normal functions of a democratic society, of a democratic government, are falling apart, are failing, and only when the security of the nation and of the people are at stake. But looking back, martial law as imposed by Marcos was not really meant for the good of the country. Instead, it was designed to neutralize his enemies, or in other words, to extinguish his rivals or anyone who would oppose him. And we can talk about this in another video. But for now, it is important to remember that it was also under martial law that the Spaniards justified concentration camps and the killings of Filipinos regardless of their innocence. It was also under martial law that the United States justified the violence and the genocide committed during the occupation of the Philippines. And it was also under martial law that thousands of Filipino youth were abducted, tortured, and killed simply for voicing out their opinions, their aspirations, and their dreams for the future of their people. While martial law may seem necessary in extreme cases, it is always important that we remain vigilant, that we remain critical whenever those in power impose martial law upon us. Because regardless of their noble intentions, martial law could be used to justify violence, corruption, and the blatant disregard of human life. It may be well meant, but it will always be a dangerous thing to let such monopoly of power go unchecked or unbalanced. Proclamation 1081 may have been signed 45 years ago, but the damages it caused can still be felt in the Philippines and the Filipino diaspora today. Many of the people behind the bloodshed and the corruption that crippled the country remain free and still in positions of power, while the countless families, the countless survivors of those who were abducted, tortured, and killed are still awaiting justice. which is why, no matter our political affiliations, it is extremely important for us to remain protective of the rights and the freedom of our people. And regardless of the current political state, it is always better to be committed to serve the people and do so with all your heart. And that is it for me today. If you got questions that you think I have the knowledge or the wisdom to answer, feel free to ask me. Feel free to ask Kirby. See you next time. Or in Tagalog, kita kits, and in Kapampangan, mi kitiks.